you're a fan of basketball, you know that the United States just brought home the gold. And it was one of the most incredible teams ever put together, one of the most incredible atmospheres. It was a star-studded event. There were so many great things happening, and it was probably one of the most memorable Olympics from a basketball standpoint that we've ever had. And even though we brought home the gold, Steve Kerr has taken so much criticism that people are even calling him a bad coach, which is crazy. But this term bad coach is prevalent throughout our culture. Everybody's calling everyone a bad coach. I don't care if it's an elementary coach, a college coach, or even a high school coach. Today, I want to talk to you about what a bad coach really means and the differences between Steve Kerr and your coach. But first and foremost, let me say this. Steve Kerr did an amazing job. And I'm going to give you 3 specific reasons why he did an amazing job and how these 3 specific reasons actually differ between many coaches. Steve Kerr did 3 specific things that I think separate him from most coaches, particularly most inexperienced coaches, or what some might call a bad coach. First and foremost, Steve Kerr got the gold, okay? Winning is a part of the assessment of any coach, right? Because that's what we play the games for. Winning isn't always as calculated as we think, but often winning is way more calculated than we even think. And so there are so many determining factors that go into the entire process of actually prevailing on that scoreboard. And coaches do a great job of doing their due diligence, taking notes, watching film, seeing nuances of their team and other teams, putting statistical analysis together, doing all these things to put a product out on the court that operates according to a certain structure. But what they don't know is how it's ultimately going to land. So coaches are responsible for having contingencies for every possible outcome. Yet and still, they never know how it's quite going to turn out. And because of this, so much of the process is calculated, but at the same time, so much of the process is out of their hands. What coaches have to do is have enough in their repertoire to be able to cause things to go in a certain way. And Steve Kerr is one of the best, if not the best, we have in the game right now at doing this. A lot of people are riding him for not playing Jason Tatum, and I get it. Jason Tatum is an all-star. Jason Tatum is more than an all-star. He's an all-NBA player. He's a champion. He's the highest paid player in the league right now. But Jason Tatum isn't necessarily as reliable as some of those other players at this point in his career. Also, Jason Tatum isn't as reliable within that given structure as some of those other players at this point in his career. I think at the end of the day, it came down to LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant are 3 of maybe the top 10 or 15 or 20 players all time, depending on where you have them on your list. They are the creme de la creme. Jason Tatum is right next to that, and there's no shame in that. And maybe he ends up trumping one of those guys as far as his legacy. But right now, he just happened to be playing with a few of the greatest players of all time. If Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant were still in their primes, LeBron James, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant would have had to take a backseat to them. They did take a backseat to Kobe in the 2016 Olympics. And so everybody has their pecking order. Every coach has their specific way of doing things. But at the end of the day, did it work? And Steve Kerr definitely made it work. Other thing I think that separates Steve Kerr is his ability to placate his players. And what this basically means is that coaching is more than X's and O's. I always talk about technical aspect of coaching and then the transformational aspect. This is the culture of the team, how you relate to people, whether or not they want to play hard for you and execute the things that you're asking them to do, whether or not they believe in your game plan and ultimately believe in you. And from moment one, the team bought in. It started with LeBron James. Also, it carried over to Steph Curry and even Kevin Durant and others, Devin Booker, Drew Holiday, Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid. So many of these guys were bought in to the highest degrees. That is a skill for coaches because, believe it or not, as a leader, your leadership matters. You can say some things, you can do some things, but at the end of the day, your team is watching you and they're judging you. And if they don't believe you as a person, forget as a coach, they're going to ultimately find a way to discredit you and not believe in you and not support you. Look at what the Lakers did with Devin Ham this year, who is a great coach in his own right. First year he got to the Western Conference Finals. I don't care who you put on the court. That's a great accomplishment because, believe you me, there are some coaches that could mess that up. Even with that being said, look at how LeBron James and Anthony Davis ultimately didn't believe in Darvin. Maybe it was something he said in a practice. Maybe it was something he said in a press conference. Maybe it was something he said in a meeting with them. But whatever it was, he didn't play his cards right. Steve Kerr played his cards right. It was something he said to get buy-in, even from Jason Tatum, who had a great attitude throughout. It was something he said to get the buy-in of the best players on that team, like LeBron James. It was something he did. It was something he is that got them to buy in. And placating your players is a great skill that most coaches don't have. Lastly, Steve Kerr left a legacy. Steve Kerr left Team USA better than what it was. That was the highest level of men's basketball competition that the Olympics has probably ever seen. And nearly every team in the Olympics had multiple NBA players. Some had, like Canada, their entire starting five was NBA player and were NBA players, and many of them all-stars. And so when you compare this to the Dream Team, for instance, or the 76 or 72 Olympics, there are very few NBA players on those foreign national teams. Even in this context, even going up against the three-time MVP in Nikola Jokic, USA was able to come away with gold, even despite all that great competition. Steve Kerr left the legacy. He left the program better than what he found it. Now, how does this compare to your coach or the average coach that is coaching a high school team? Maybe it's a freshman coach or a JV coach or a varsity coach. We have a culture that is quick to call people bad at their jobs. And why is this? First and foremost, we are all people. And as people, we're all learning. We're all growing. I'm growing at what I'm doing right now. Some may say I'm not very good. And it's all relative because in order to get to a Steve Kerr or Phil Jackson level, we've got to start somewhere. And so rather than I don't believe in calling any coach bad, especially a high school coach, because as an athletic director, I can tell you, these are the most thankless jobs known to man. First and foremost, the stipend is often less than $3,000 or $4,000. And you're talking about giving time every day of the week, giving weekends, giving nights, giving summers, giving off seasons, losing vacation, losing times with your family for a mere $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000. Some places it may be 10, whoop-de-doo. But the juice isn't always worth the squeeze. And how do you know? Because there are less and less coaches signing up for these jobs. There are less and less people that are willing to even come interview for even high profile jobs. And so we need to get away from calling any coach bad. If you want to say your coach is not very good, let's be more specific. And what I find is there are typically 4 reasons why you may consider a coach not very good. First, they may be inexperienced, or they may be egotistical, or they may lack resources, or they may be limited in their repertoire, meaning they're one-dimensional. These are generally the factors around why you may be not connecting with your coach and you may be thinking, my coach isn't very good. Let's get away from that verbiage of I have a bad coach, and let's be more specific. Let's say I have an inexperienced coach, or I have a coach who's very egotistical, or I have a coach that has limited resources. Maybe he doesn't have a good staff around him, or maybe he doesn't have good players. Or maybe the coach is limited in his repertoire. He only knows how to play with a certain type of player or a certain type of style. So that's the first thing. But specifically, I want to compare your coach to what I just said about Steve Kerr, because first and foremost, Steve Kerr got gold. A lot of times winning is harder than what we think. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, winning comes down to some specific nuances that maybe your coach doesn't have available to him, or whether it's because the coach doesn't know about them yet or how to use them, or because the coach doesn't have it at his disposal. Maybe your coach can't bring Anthony Davis off the bench or Jason Tatum off the bench. Maybe your coach doesn't have Jeff Van Gundy on his coaching staff, or Eric Spoelstra, some of the greatest coaches of all time. So when he's stumped in the middle of the game, he has somebody that has a great idea or a different perspective. I've been in it. I've seen it from a coach's perspective. These jobs are difficult. There's high levels of pressure. There's low amounts of time or limited amounts of time, and you're having to make decisions in a crunch. And often when our coaches don't get the goal, they don't win a lot, or maybe they don't win the big games, this reflects negatively on a coach when winning is actually something that's really, really hard to do. So if you're somebody who's judging your coach because you don't win enough, realize that there are a variety of factors that go into this. And that doesn't necessarily mean your coach is a bad coach. Next, I talk about Steve's ability to placate players. And I think this is one of the biggest areas where, quote unquote, bad coaches fall short, because as coaches, we're leaders. And as leaders, we have to be able to connect with all different types of people. We have to be able to not only connect with different types of people, but actually inspire different types of people. I will admit that many coaches struggle in this area, but it's only because we as people struggle at this area. We all have our subset of people that we connect closest to. Often it's people that look like us or have the same experience as us, and other people we don't quite jive with for whatever reason. Oftentimes, this is unintentional. This is just a lack of perspective and viewpoints and tools in our tool belt in order to connect with people. And maybe we've said the wrong thing. The other thing about athletics is it's highly charged in emotions. And so maybe a coach yells at a player or says something derogatory in a bad moment. Lord knows we've all had bad moments. And now that player is cut off. And yes, the coach should find a way to recover that relationship. But not all people are good at that. And so often it's our coach's inability to know the team, to be able to get the most out of that bench player who may be coming from a different demographic, or get the most out of that superstar player who is a wild child and the coach is very strict. Often coaches aren't very good at wearing different hats and connecting with different groups, even sometimes communicating what the goals may be, where I am really getting the most out of my starters, but I'm also able to keep my bench players engaged and know that at any moment it can be their time. Those are different weights on the scales that not all coaches are good at handling. If your coach is someone who lacks the ability to placate players, or maybe it's just placate you and speak your language and engage you and really connect with you, that doesn't necessarily make him or her a bad coach. That just means maybe they struggle in that particular area, or maybe multiple areas. Lastly, I talk about that Steve Kerr left a legacy. Good coaches leave programs, whether it's year to year or from decade to decade, in a better place than what they left it. However, this is an extremely difficult thing to do, because often we're comparing coaches to the best coach we know, or the best coach that's ever come through that program. There's only one best coach, right? There's only the greatest coach of all time, but there's only one greatest coach of all time in any particular program. Or there's the coach that's best to you. Maybe it was your AAU coach in 8th grade. Maybe it was when your dad coached you or your mom coached you in AAU. Whatever the case may be, we hold coaches to this standard of the best person we've ever played for, or the best person that's ever run this particular program. And that's unfair in a lot of ways, okay? Because it is hard when compared to the greatest that's ever done something to actually say, I did better than that person, you know? And so realize the context that just because your coach isn't necessarily the best that you've ever been around does not make them a bad coach. I'm starting a Dealing with Difficult Coaches series, and I hope that you tune in, because we're going to be breaking down not only the nuances of what goes on in the coach's mind and the coach's heart, but also how you can ultimately deal with difficult coaches, whether it's somebody who you just don't understand, or somebody who you don't see eye to eye with, or somebody who maybe your playing style is completely different than what they want to see. Ultimately, that coach determines your ability to get on the floor, and no matter what, just like a boss, you're going to have to learn to adapt to that coach to get the most out of your situation. And we want to talk about how we can do that. So tune into this series, and I hope this helps you understand the nuances of good versus bad coaches, and we'll see you next video.